in Genesis 22 proved that Abraham really did believe. He believed that all that God had promised, all that God had showed him, including that future, including the Messiah, including the resurrection, all depended on the promise of God being fulfilled, and that promise being fulfilled depended upon Isaac being alive. And he believed that. He believed it. And Abraham, when you think about it, must have told Isaac about all of this as well. Because this was also really a test for Isaac in many ways, because it proved that Isaac believed those promises true. Or he believed those as well. For him not to struggle, for him not to resist, not to fight, tells us the kind of faith that Isaac had in that time and in those moments. So this portion opens up when you're starting off in Genesis 23. I hope everybody was able to read this, right? Everybody able to read this? It opens up with the death of Sarah. And it essentially ends, for all practical purposes, with Abraham's death. So this portion is a tragic portion in many ways. Abraham, as an example of our faith, one of the fathers that our hearts are supposed to be turned back towards. Sarah as well is an example for women of faith, for our daughters to be seeking after, to be a woman like her. And yet in this Torah portion, even in the accounting of their lives, their death, the promise continues. The promise, even in the midst of this tragedy. So it starts off in chapter 23, verse 1. It says, "Now Sarah's life was 127 years, the years of Sarah's life. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her." The traditional interpretation teaches that Sarah dies shortly after the events of chapter 22, the binding of Isaac. So if she dies at 127, that makes Isaac about 36 or 37. I know I said 39 last week, but I had that wrong. Oh, yeah, you need that. Why is that doing that all of a sudden? Okay. But she was 127, and so that makes Isaac, if that traditional interpretation is true, about 36 or 37 years old. And this is a pretty quick summary of the events of her death. There's very little fanfare, and it reads that Abraham came to mourn for Sarah, to weep over her. It reads as if Abraham was not with her when she died. That he had to come to her. But he grieved over her, he mourned over her, he clearly loved her. But now what was he going to do? Because life was not going to be the same for him. Abraham and his family, they had been living in this land for decades. But was it ever really their land? No. It was never really their land. He could not sing, the song that we sometimes hear in this country. This land is my land. This land is... Am I the only one that knows this song? Y'all are not singing? This land is my land. This land is for land. California to the high. Yeah, see, y'all know that song. See, I can't sing everything for you. But he could not sing that about the land that he was living in. This world truly was not his home. He was just passing through. And they lived, Abraham lived and his family lived by the permission of those who did rule the land. He lived there by their leave, by their permission, by their acceptance. He had no real claim to it. He couldn't just do whatever he wanted, because somebody else, the rightful owners, could always legally come to him and stop him. All he had to go on in being there, in living there, was the promise of God. And I'm sure he was beginning to wonder about just exactly how this promise was going to work out. Much like the promise that had said that he had been told in the scriptures about having children. He was told he was going to have a child, and it took after about 11 years with nothing happening. They took matters into their own hand, but Ishmael did not count towards the fulfillment of the promise. So after 11 years, the promise hadn't come to pass. It was 25 years before he would see the promise fulfilled in the birth of Isaac. And when it comes to the land, it's been over 60 years. He was 25 years until Isaac was born, and now he's 36 years old, if you go with that interpretation. That's over 60 years. And nothing has happened yet in terms of the land. That's a long time to wait. That's a long time to go with never doubting, never questioning, never wondering, is this really going to happen? Do you think he went for 60 plus years without ever asking those questions? I'm sure he did. He had seen much of this land. God told him to walk around it. He told him to explore it. God even had to push him a little bit to get him to pursue armies, to run through the land, to see the extent of it. But the first thing that Abraham received in fulfillment of the promise wasn't a town, it wasn't a city, it was not some sort of fortified position, it was not some valuable well or anything of that sort, not a fought over and desired territory. The first thing that Abraham received as part of his inheritance, part of that promise from God, the first thing that he put to use as something of his own in the land was a grave. And that's hard to understand. Verse 3 says, Then Abraham arose from before his dead one and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am an outsider and a sojourner among you. Give me a gravesite among you, so that I may bury my dead from before my presence. So after 60 plus years of waiting, what kicked off the fulfillment of promise was something tragic. Was something that no one would ever want to have to experience. He needs this cave so that he can honor his wife at her death. And according to Jewish custom, this would be, how long would it take him? How long would he did he wait before he buried his wife? Yeah, a day. That's as soon as he got there, that would be his first priority. If he wasn't with her when he died, he would have got there as quick as he could. This would have been the first thing he had to deal with. As soon as possible, he needed to see that she was buried properly. And he had to ask those who possessed the land, those who owned the land, those who, according to the promise, he and his descendants were going to replace them, right? And he would have been in that hurry. He would have had to do something. And he would have done something that maybe he hadn't been willing to do so far. He had to act and do things without thinking about the consequences or the implications. I don't know how you guys are, but sometimes I tend to overthink things. Anybody else do that? I tend to, in overthinking, when you get to the part where you're overthinking things, you end up doing nothing many times. That you can be so bogged down with all of the options, with all of the possibilities, with all the considerations, the pros and cons, that you are frozen. And sometimes you need a little bit of a kick to get you going. An event, a moment, a push of some kind. And many times that comes in the form of a hardship of some kind. Have y'all noticed that? Maybe in your past God told you to move, but you're comfortable where you're at, and suddenly you lose your job. Now all of a sudden you kind of have to do something. You can't just stay the way things were. And if you've needed to be looking for a while, you just haven't done it. Or you're concerned, maybe Your car is not going to last much longer. You're starting to hear some noises in places that don't need to have noises. But you just keep putting it off. You put off looking for another one because you love not having a car payment or something to that effect. And then all of a sudden, maybe there's an accident, or you park your car in a good, safe place, and some idiot in the parking lot hits it anyway because they just don't know how to drive. So you need a new one. You would think over the course of those 60 years that Abraham could have bought some land, of course, in that time. Maybe he was thinking, processing, that, maybe I'm trying to get ahead of God, just like we had done with Hagar, and we shouldn't do that. We should wait for him to take care of the situation. Maybe he had even tried to buy some land before. But no one was willing necessarily to sell it to him because he was an outsider. There's a lot of that going on even in Israel today. The Israelis don't want to sell to the Arabs. Arabs don't want to sell to the Israelis. All those types of things go on in considerations of things. So how exactly did Abraham expect God to fulfill this promise about the land? I doubt in all of his considerations, I doubt his considerations included anything to do with Sarah dying to make it happen. Any more than he would have thought that God would use Sarah's barrenness as part of the promise of having a child and having descendants. But in fulfilling both of those things, the child and the land, God was using hardship and he was using pain to do it. And these are with people who believed him. These were people who loved the Lord. These are people who trusted him. And all those popular teachers and preachers that are on TV today, all those name it and claim it types that are teaching health and wealth gospel and all that stuff that's out there, that is so much garbage. Y'all realize that, right? That is so much garbage. That if you just have enough faith, then all of these good things are going to just automatically come your way. And of course, the implication is if you're not receiving them, well, it's because you're not really believing them. If you just have enough faith, then these bad things won't happen to you. And if they are, well, there must be something wrong where? With you. You must not have enough faith. It's like we're not even reading the same Bible. See, most of those teachers don't like, for example, they don't like the book of Job very much. They don't see Job as an example of a man of faith. Why? Because Job, he loses both his wealth and his health. He loses everything. And I've seen various teachers just rip on Job like nobody's business. But their theology, they do that. They have to do that because their theology can't handle what Job is showing us. Because their theology, their teaching, it actually sounds a lot more like those friends that come to visit. That's their theology in a nutshell. The health and wealth gospel are those guys that come to try to tell Job, you're the one that's messing up. You're the one that's at fault. And those are the guys that are condemned. See, what we need to struggle coming to terms with, and it's not always easy coming to terms with it, we don't necessarily like this, but it's often the most faithful that experience the most difficulty. Because your faith is tested in hardship. Your faith, which is more valuable than gold, God wants to prove your faith genuine. But it's in those times of testing and hardship that you seek him more, that you pray to him more, that you rely on him more in those times of difficulty. That's when you go for that. And it's sometimes instead of hesitating, some things happen and you have to move, you have to act, you have to trust. And just like Abraham, for us as well, this world is not our home, and we're all just passing through. And this world is not going to do us any favors. We too are outsiders and sojourners. We belong to another kingdom. And the ruler of this world doesn't like foreigners in his territory. The enemy wants to make it painful to live in his territory. Because what's he trying to do? He's trying to push us out. He wants to take advantage of you. He wants to take advantage of me as the people of God. He is looking for leverage. He is looking for ways to make us compromise. He wants to use your hardships and your tragedies not to take you to God, but to pull you further away from Him. And see, in this situation, in Genesis 23, all Abraham wants is a burial site. Something small, something that can't really be used for anything else. And the world is still going to try to lure him into some false sense of security, even by appearing nice, even by trying to appear helpful. They're going to try to take advantage of our times and our moments of need. In verse 5, it says this, "The sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, 'Listen to us, my Lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the best of our graves. None among us will withhold his grave from you to bury your dead one.'" They'll often use flattery. They'll offer their best. They'll suggest here, everybody here, we're all your friend. They know that Abraham has been blessed. They know he is capable. They know that he is successful. They know that he can be a military power and a military force. I mean, that's what we saw a few chapters earlier when he goes and defeats those kings that had ransacked Sodom and Gomorrah. And he's strong enough to where he has been able to survive in this land that was not his own for 60 years. He's been among them for that long. Yet he is still an outsider. He is still a sojourner to them. Abraham has successfully kept himself and his family distinct from all of them. He has kept them separate from these Canaanites, and they are looking for a way to get him. They are looking for a way to get in. They are looking for a way maybe to carry favor, a way to make Abraham owe them a favor, or something to that effect. They're trying to get a hook in to where he no longer remains so distinct. But Abraham, he's not looking for a favor. He knows their intent. He knows what they're going to try to accomplish even in this. He's got his wits about him. Verse 7, it says, "Then Abraham got up and bowed down to the people of the land." So even as great as he may be, he showed some humility in all of that to the sons of Heth, and he spoke with them, saying, "If you are of a mind to let me bury my dead from before my presence, listen to me." He says, "Plead with Ephron, son of Zophar, on my behalf." Sorry about that. Meant to get that up there. He says that he may give me the cave of Machpelah that belongs to him, that is at the end of his field. At the full price, let him give it to me in your midst for a gravesite. It uses the word give. And I think that causes some confusion for us. Because it's not give in the same sense that we use the word give. Abraham doesn't want them to give him the field. He is offering to buy the field. He says there in verse 9, "At the full price, let him give it to me." Well, he's not asking them to give it to him. He's asking to sell it to him. They didn't have Remax. They didn't have Century 21 back then. There were not for sale signs at the front of the cave. Abraham is asking for permission to take possession of something that Ephron currently owns, asking if he would be willing to part with it. This is a negotiation of a sale. But notice something important. Abraham knows exactly where this cave is, doesn't he? He knows where this field is. He knows who owns the field. He knows all of that before going in. Do you think he's seen this field before? Yep. Do you think he's familiar with it and what's on it and what's in it? So clearly he has seen it. He is familiar with it. Abraham most certainly knew even more that Ephron was sitting right there listening to all of this. And Ephron, he plays the part of this one who is almost a generous neighbor. They may not have been willing to sell him anything before. But now all of a sudden it's kind of brought to the forefront. Verse 10, it says, Now Ephron was sitting in the midst of the sons of Heth. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the ears of the sons of Heth and all those who enter the gate of his city, saying, No, my lord, listen to me. The field, I hereby give it to you. Also the cave that is in it, I hereby give it to you. In the eyes of the sons of my people, I hereby give it to you. Bury your dead one. Oh, isn't he nice? He's playing the game. He's trying to show and appear generous in some respects. But what's Abraham asked for? Sell me the cave. And what's Ephron all of a sudden upped the ante to? Oh, no. I'm going to give you not just the cave, I'm also going to unload on you the field. He wants to unload the whole thing. And he's pushing Abraham to buy a whole lot more than he's asking for, a whole lot more than he may need in this moment. See, you're not going to get the cave, Abraham, unless you buy the whole thing. And remember, he's already offered to pay the full price. All the give language makes it look like he's being generous, but in reality, he's trying to use Abraham's need to get as much out of him as possible. Has anybody experienced things like that before? When you're buying a car, buying a house, or whatever it is, and if you need something, the more you need something, the higher the price usually gets, right? See, maybe he thinks of it as doing Abraham a favor, that maybe he'll think Abraham will owe him something later, and he can leverage it later. In any case, Ephron, in reality, he's being very short-sighted of what's going on, because Abraham isn't interested in that kind of manipulation. Verse 12, it says, Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he spoke to Ephron in the ears of the people of the land. You notice when it keeps repeating that phrase, in the eyes of or in the ears of everybody, what is being established here? How many witnesses are there? Plenty of them. There are plenty of witnesses. And he spoke to Ephron in the ears of the people of the land, saying, But if only you would please listen to me, I hereby give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead one there. See, this is what's driving the moment. The tragedy of Sarah's death is what makes this whole situation happen. It's something that the Canaanites are trying to take advantage of, but that God is actually going to use to begin fulfilling his promise. Ephron may be trying to gain a foothold into Abraham's family or his fortune. He may be trying to be able to use a gentleman's agreement of some kind, or a handshake kind of a deal to claim the land back sometime in the future. Again, a selfish and short-sighted goal. But God, through this moment, is going for a permanent foothold for Abraham. He is going for a permanent foothold in their territory. The God is trying to establish a base in the enemy territory after 60 years. And Abraham wants to make sure, in all of that language, he wants to make sure that Ephron has no future claim over that property. He has no future claim over him. It's very similar to how he dealt with the king of Sodom back in Genesis chapter 14. In chapter 14, he says, the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people. Well, those possessions you can take for yourself. Right? He's being generous, letting him keep all the things that he won back in battle. It says, but Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand in oath to Adonai El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth. Not a thread or even a sandal strap of all that is yours will I take, so that you will not say that I have made Abram rich. That you will never be able to claim success or claim my success or my God's success as yours. That's how they were operating. That's how they were thinking. Abraham is exemplifying what it means really to be as wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. And when it comes back to Ephron, he then names the price. Verse 14, it says, So Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My Lord, listen to me, a land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between me and you? Bury your dead one. It says that Abraham heard Ephron. And so Abraham weighed out to Ephron the silver that he had spoken of in the ears of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver at the merchant's rate. How much did he pay for? Did he make like a down payment, a partial payment, half a payment? He paid all of it. He paid all of it. Many commentaries and interpreters will harp on how high of a price this is. How Ephron is seeming like he's taking advantage of Abraham in his time of need. It's kind of like, I feel for those that are coming into this area and they're buying property around here, sight unseen. Have y'all been hearing about people that do that? I can't imagine having the nerve. I don't think I could, because if it turns out the people selling are misleading you on the property, or they're leaving out some important details, or they're misrepresenting it, you could easily overpay for something, and then you'll be stuck with it. And if all Abraham was getting was rights to the cave, then I certainly would agree that 400 shekels is a bit high. But in reality, Abraham is actually getting a lot more than that. And he's paying full price for it. He's paying it all up front in this moment. So there's not a payment plan. He's not going to get behind on his payment so somebody can come and claim it back in the future. He's actually getting a lot more than the cave. It says in verse 17, Now Ephron's field that is in Machpelah next to Mamre, the field and the cave that is in it, and all the trees that are in the field, in all its surrounding territory, was handed over to Abraham as a purchased possession in the eyes of the sons of Heth before all those who enter the gate of his city. Abraham purchased the field at full price in front of everybody. And this is not like one of those moments, that Yeshua makes a reference to in Luke chapter 14 for those that will sound foolish to avoid responsibility. In Luke 14, Yeshua said to him, a certain man was hosting a large banquet, and he invited many. It says, at the time for the banquet, he sent his slave to tell those who had been invited, Come, everything is already prepared. But every one of them began to beg off. The first one said to him, I bought a farm, and I'm obligated to go out to see it. And I'm asking you to have me excused. You look at that guy, it's like, well, what, are you stupid? Why would you buy a farm and you've never even seen it before? All right, this is an example of somebody who is making not necessarily the best choice, but they're also using it as a means of getting out. But see, remember, Abraham, he knew all the details about the cave. He knew all the details about the field. He knew exactly what he was getting and what he was paying for. This was not a sight unseen purchase. And I believe that Abraham valued this property more than Ephron did. I wouldn't be surprised, knowing how God works in Abraham's life, that Abraham thought he was getting it off for a steal. He likely sees more potential in the land than Ephron does. Now, we don't have details about how big this field is, but it did talk about some surrounding territory, right? It is big enough to have a cave in it at one end. So it has some terrain or some mountain in it, yet it's still called a field. So it has some elevation. It has some flat land. A field can be used for animals. A field can be used for planting. Can either one of those be profitable in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing? Yep, they sure can. If it was a field for planting, then Abraham would be calculating the value of all of the crops that he could grow on it. And that's how the Torah, has the Israelites do all that kind of stuff later. When it comes to lending money, they lend things in terms of a field. If they're purchasing a field, they have to purchase a field based on the value of the crops that it will produce, right? Abraham's thinking like that. If it was for flocks and herds, it could be a base of operations, a shearing station, a shelter or refuge that no one could push him off of. He could be calculating just how many he could support with that field. So generations to come, essentially there is a future harvest that is starting with this field. A future harvest not just of money or crops, things like that. What happens when the field to a field where the word of God is sown? Right? There is a harvest even of righteousness. There is a harvest even of a people that will come because he now has this field. Then there are the trees. We don't know what kind of trees they are. If they are pine or they're cedar, does the lumber have any value? Yeah, sure would. If they are fruit trees, then Abraham could be calculating the value of the fruit and the crops that come from that. And trees are also symbolic of what? Of people, right? A people bearing fruit under the kingdom of God. And more importantly, when you think about trees that are in this territory of this field and surrounding area, where there are trees, then there has to be something else, right? Where there's trees, there's got to be water. See, there are some people, and that water is extremely valuable to be able to raise the kind of trees that they're talking about here. But there are some people who have property, who have businesses, that don't really know what to do with it. They don't really know how to make it work. They don't really know how to make it successful or get something from it. They don't know what to do with it. But then someone else can come along and buy it. Y'all ever seen this happen? If somebody else comes along and buys the same thing that somebody wasn't able to do anything with for decades, and all of a sudden they turn it into a multi-million-dollar operation just like that. A team hires a new coach, and the very next year they practically go undefeated with the same players, same people. Which type of person do you think Abraham was? Is he the type that would have something and he wouldn't know what to do with it and it would just kind of sit there kind of floundering? Or is he the type that knows what to do with something and it would make it successful? Yeah, he's that type because of the work of God in his life. See, Abraham was the type that would know what to do with a field like the one that he just purchased in the sight of all of the people there at the city gate, all of those witnesses at the gate. He pays no full price for it. So there's not going to be any takebacks. There's not going to be any legal challenges. There's not going to be anything that threatens the land from ever being taken from him. This is Abraham's foothold in enemy territory that he didn't have to fight for, that no one will have the right to take from him. And that's a big deal. That is God using a difficulty, God using a tragic situation to accomplish something that wasn't going to necessarily happen on its own. I mean, do you think about back to World War II for a minute, if the Allies, do you think they would have paid 400 shekels of silver for a little beachfront property on Normandy? Do you think they would have paid that instead of what they did have to pay in lives? Yes. They would have paid that in a heartbeat with all the land, all the troops and all the equipment that they lost there. this field, the trees, the cave, they are serving as the down payment of the inheritance that is going to be following in the generations to come. This field, this cave, these trees are the first fruits of the promise that has been made to Abraham, and some of those things that he was able to see. And even in the midst of Abraham clearly grieving for the death of his wife, dealing with that terrible hardship and loss, is God still acting on his behalf? Yes, he is. And when we are tempted to think that our moments of hardship mean that God has abandoned us, we need to look around and reconsider and start looking for those things that God is actually doing for us, even because of the hardship that we're experiencing at the moment. Just because we are going through those hardships does not mean that God is not working, that God is not moving, that he is not taking care of things that might not otherwise happen. It says in verse 19, afterward, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave in the field of Machpelah, next to Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And so the field and the cave that was in it were handed over to Abraham as a gravesite from the sons of Heth. And so he was able to get his first fulfillment of the promise of the land. And this death of Sarah also seems to have, in some ways, kick-started Abraham to start thinking about Isaac, about all of those descendants that are supposed to come from this son of promise. You know, it's hard to have any grandchildren when your son doesn't have a bride that he's responsible to find. Chapter 24 opens with, now Abraham was old, advanced in years, and Adonai blessed Abraham in everything. And then Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who managed everything that belonged to him, now put your hand under my thigh, so that I may make you take an oath by Adonai, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am dwelling. On the contrary, to my land and to my relatives you must go and get a wife for my son Isaac. So in this culture, the father finds the wife for his bride, finds a wife for his son. And unlike, some children that occur in the following generations in the near future, like Esau, who went and found his own, caused some problems because he was doing that, Isaac is waiting for his father to do this. And we learn in the next Torah portion that Isaac was 40 when he marries Rebekah. See, Isaac was 40 years old when he took for himself Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. So if that interpretation that he was 36 or 37 years old when Sarah dies, it's been 3 to 4 years after her death. And Isaac has been waiting for the bride his father would find for him. He trusts his father. But I'm sure at that age, he's probably beginning to wonder what the holdup was, right? I'm sure he's probably thinking, Dad, don't you think I'm ready at this point? Or, Dad, I've seen a lot of pretty girls over the years that he probably noticed. But it's not just any woman would do. It couldn't be any one of those among the local Canaanites. They didn't share any of the same gods. They didn't have the same practices. They also were the ones that he and his descendants, again, were going to replace from the land. And Abraham still considered himself and his family as different, as outsiders, as sojourners to them. This was not supposed to be a mixed marriage. It's not a racial kind of distinction so much as a theological one, so much as a moral one. That's the kind of distinction that he's making. Just like in chapter 22, in the pursuit of the bride, just as in chapter 22, when he is that symbol of the Messiah who is offering and laying down his life for us. When in the pursuit of the bride, Isaac is a picture of the Messiah. And what's amazing about all of this in chapter 24, servants are sent forth to make sure that the bride is found and located and made ready to meet the groom. There's a couple of different ways that we are living out here. In some ways, that's who we are supposed to be as disciples of Yeshua. We're supposed to be like the servant who we go out and we tell people about Yeshua. We're the servants trying to locate the bride to bring them back to him. And if only we would be as faithful and bold as this servant of Abraham was in pursuit of the Messiah's bride. If we are faithful to fulfill our mission, the Father will cross our paths with those who are ready to receive that proposal of marriage, because that's what it is. That's what the baptism is really showing, showing a sign that you are saying yes to his proposal of marriage. The servant, when you read that account of the servant going, he is asking for a sign from God to help him identify the one for Isaac. He says, "Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, 'Please tip your jar so that I may drink,' and she will say, 'Drink, and I'll also water your camels,' let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. So by this I will know that you have shown graciousness to my master." Notice he didn't say, "Well, the first pretty girl I see, let her be the one." Is that the quality that he's looking for? No, he was looking for one that was generous. He was looking for one that was hospitable, that one that was hardworking spirit, much like Abraham and Sarah have had over the years. Because if she were willing to fulfill this, what he asked for, it would actually create a lot of hard work for her. Because camels can drink a lot of water. And she would have to take multiple trips down into the well to carry out the water. But I love how God has already started answering the servant's prayer even before he started. It says, "Now before he had finished speaking, behold, there was Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, going out with her jar on her shoulder. And now the young woman was very good looking, a girl of marriageable age. She was a virgin. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up." Now the servant, his prayer was not very long, right? So in order for her to appear before he had even finished, when did God start answering his prayer? Before he even started talking. Before he even was speaking. She would have had to have left her house, 10 to 15 minutes earlier, at least, depending on how far away she lived. Before he even asked, God was already answering the prayer. And y'all, that goes on a whole lot more than we realize. I remember one incident when I was marching in drum corps. We had a girl that passed out, was sick or whatever else during the course of the day, had to go to the hospital. And we never heard anything else about what happened to her. And so we were getting ready to lay down for the night, and one of her best friends was there. She was all upset, saying, I don't know what's happened to her. I don't know if she's sick, if she's had to go home. And so me and some of my friends gathered around her, and we started praying for her to come back. And the Lord, just let her be here where we are, that she's well enough for her to be here. And we said amen. We kind of all started walking back to our place. We just started to kind of lay down and get ready to go to sleep. And then the door flies open, the lights flip on, and there she is. So she was already on her way before we started. But that's how God so often does things. You and I, we've got to understand, even in our hard times, even in our tragic moments, when we don't think God is listening, much less answering, that He is already at work providing an answer, even before we even know what to ask about. And it may not be this dramatic, or instantaneous, and that would be nice if that happened all the time. I'm not going to deny that. But God is often working on our behalf to meet our needs, to fulfill His purpose and plan before we even recognize what our need is and what our place is in the moment. Verse 17, it says, the servant then ran to meet her and said, "Please let me sip a little water from your jar." So she said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly lowered her jar into her hand and gave him a drink. Now when she finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will also draw water for your camels until they are finished drinking." Everything he asked for is right there. Verse 20 says, "So she quickly poured out her jug into the trough, ran back to the well to draw water, and drew water for all his camels. And while the man continued to pay close attention to her, keeping silent, in order to know whether or not Adonai had made his way successful." So when everything seemed to be answered as he had asked, the servant did exactly what he should have done. He did the right thing and worshiped. It says the man bowed down and worshiped Adonai. And he said, "Blessed be Adonai, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loyalty and his truth toward my master. And as for me, Adonai has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers." Because she had told him who she was. He worshiped and praised God. He had learned from Abraham to trust and acknowledge God. So this servant was a disciple and a follower of the God of Abraham, as we are supposed to be. See, the events of the lives of the patriarchs, like Abraham, like Isaac and Jacob, what has happened to the Israelites, they're supposed to serve as examples for us to help us to live before God, to help us to walk in His ways, written down for our benefit so that we can know what to do, but even some of those times what not to do. Romans 15 puts it like this: "For whatever was written before was written for our instruction, so that through patience and the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope." 1 Corinthians 10:11 says, "Now these things happened to them as an example, and it was written down as a warning to us, on whom the ends of the ages have come." Now again, you should all have already read this, so you should already know how the servant took a gold nose ring and placed it on her, gold bands and put them on her arms, suggesting that it does suggest that she was not wearing such adornment already. Right? Maybe she was, because she was working, she was doing a task, and so she wasn't going to wear those nice things. But perhaps it was because the family, especially with Laban leading things, may not have been doing as well as Abraham and his family were doing. May not have been as financially well off as they were. Because if you think about it, if they were as well off as Abraham was doing, would Rebekah be the one kind of doing that work, or would they have sent somebody else? Probably would have sent somebody else. You know, we see in verse 30 of Genesis 24 that Laban, he sees the gold ring, he sees the armband, and he immediately jumps at the chance to get more. As if all of his problems are about to be solved because this guy shows up. And if you follow the later accounts during the life of Jacob, when he returns there to Laban, that's one of the things that his daughters say about their father, Laban, is that he does not know how to manage money. He does not know how to manage wealth. In fact, he has squandered the fortune that gets paid for Rebekah here in this thing. So Laban is going to want to get out as much out of the servant as possible. But the servant is committed to the mission, just like we should be. There's a whole lot of things that can distract us from the mission and cause of God. It says, food was placed before him to eat, but he said, "I won't eat until I have stated my business." So he said, "Speak." And now he says, "I am Abraham's servant." See, it's so easy to get wrapped up in our own lives, in our own hurts, even our own answers to prayer, that we sometimes forget what we're here for. We forget the mission. We forget the responsibility that we have as servants of Messiah. We've got to understand that the enemy is going to try to distract us. He's going to try to sidetrack us. He's going to try to even slow us down, to undermine us from accomplishing the mission. Even when we find one who will believe. After seeing all the gifts and the wealth that he had brought, even when they had said yes, so yeah, sure, she can go and she can become his bride, Laban wanted even more from that. It says, her brother, this is verse 55, when her brother with her mother said, let the young woman stay with us a few days or 10, and then afterwards she may go. But he said to them, don't delay me, since Adonai has made my way successful. Send me off so that I can go to my master. Now, some traditions will say it wasn't just a matter of days, but 10 months to a year that they wanted her to stay, that they wanted her to stall and wait there. Because Laban does the same thing with Jacob later, doesn't he? So we'll just stay another 7 years, trying to squeeze out every ounce of blessing that he can from God's people. And so sometimes we need to understand that some people want to be around you because they see God's blessing in your life, right? And they don't want you to have it. They want to have it for themselves. They think they can essentially buy the gift of God. They can acquire, those things. They can buy the Holy Spirit, like what happens in Acts chapter 8 with Simon the sorcerer. But when he could not be deterred, when this servant could not be deterred because he was focused on his mission, then it was taken to Rebekah, and they asked her what her will was. So they said, we will call the young woman and let's ask her opinion. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. And so they sent Rebekah, their sister, off with her nanny and Abraham's servant and his men. Now, can you imagine her courage to do this? She is leaving her land. She is leaving her relatives. She is leaving her father's house. All those things that God had asked of Abraham, she's doing. For an unknown situation, right? For a man she has never met. For a man she has never even seen. It's not like he's got his picture up on some dating website and app and she can read about him and she can check him out and say, okay, well, he's not a total slob or whatever else. She's got nothing like that. For an unknown situation. And see, when you see this situation, it's not Isaac. He's not leaving the promise. She is going to him. Isaac never leaves the promised land, neither does Yeshua, despite what many of the many scholars out there will try to say. She must be willing to leave where she was and go to join him where he is. She's got to leave her old life behind. She's got to leave her old beliefs and practices behind to join his, even when she didn't fully know what they were or even understand them entirely. All she has seen is the down payment. All she has seen is the bridal price. Because what does that reveal to her? The bridal price reveals how much she is valued, doesn't it? Doesn't that say what he is willing to give for her? And based on that alone, she was willing to go to be united to her bridegroom. And while on one hand, we who are believers, that are disciples, in one hand, we're like the servant with the mission, and we need to focus on and perform the service of our master. In another way, we are a lot like Rebekah. We're a lot like the bride. We must be willing to leave behind what we know, what we've grown up with, what we're familiar with, and go and join our bridegroom. And we would be willing to do that. We should be willing to do that. The reason why we don't, or more people don't, is that we don't have a good enough understanding of the bridal price that was paid for us. If we truly did, if anyone else truly understood the price that was paid to secure our freedom from darkness to light, would we hesitate to go to him? No, I don't think we would. If we really knew what that meant, we would go to him sight unseen. Because the groom is ready, is he? The bride must be willing. We have never seen our Messiah face to face. We have never seen him in the flesh. But that's the kind of faith that we need to know, that if we understood the bridal price, we would go. That's how 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 8 puts it. It says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you don't see him now, you trust him and are filled with a joy that is glorious beyond words, receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. That's why when she sees him coming from such a far away and finds out who he is, that's when everything changes for her. We have not seen him, yet we love him, and we are willing to leave everything behind to go to him. And that's even the case, even in our tragedies, even in our difficulty, in our hardships, that God is still at work. He is laying the foundations. He is providing the footholds for our future in even those moments. And even when we have a hard time seeing or understanding it, we still must believe and come to our Messiah, because we know the price that has been paid. And as Yeshua himself talks about, blessed are those who have not seen and yet still believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, who may have a hard time seeing because of all those things that are going on. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed.